With Vesper's host being right around the corner, and this dungeon being the first dungeon in Destiny's history to feature a day 1 race, I wanted to make a video covering the best builds to run to help you and your team get a contest mode clear. For today's video, I wanted to cover what I believe will be the 2 best builds to run for each class, so that you can be fully prepared to take on this dungeon. As always, I'll have the dim links in the description below, and also in the description will be timestamps for each class, in case you'd just like to skip to one class in particular. But with that being said, I'm SniperKH, and let's dive in. To start the video off, I want to discuss Titans. While I do find it a little difficult to recommend multiple builds for Titans, I do believe I have found the 2 builds that will suit any Titan for this dungeon. For the first build, I wanted to recommend the Prismatic Consecration build. If you've kept up with build crafting throughout the final shape, then you've certainly heard of this build, but if you haven't, this build is designed to give you amazing ad clear and impressive boss damage thanks to the consecration aspect. When it comes down to setting up this build, it is crucial to run Frenzied Blade for the 3 melee charges, which will give you 3 consecration slams. Knockout for the bonus melee damage, Facet of Purpose to give you an elemental buff depending on what super you're running, Facet of Protection for damage resistance when surrounded by targets, and your choice of either Glacial Quake to give you access to Frost Armor, Twilight Arsenal to give you access to Devour, or Hammer of Soul to give you access to Restoration. When it comes down to what exotics you should pair with this build, my go-to is Syntheseps, as they'll grant you a 165% melee damage boost when surrounded by 3 or more targets, which will happen often thanks to the nature of this build. However, if you don't want to run Syntheseps or don't have them, then you can run Heart of Inmost Light to regenerate abilities back faster. And if you have an exotic class item with both Syntheseps and Heart of the Inmost Light, then you should definitely use it. I truly believe this build will be amazing in the day 1, as it will give you the opportunity to burst targets down easily while letting you clear ads easily. The second Titan build I wanted to cover would be none other than Banner of War. Yes, despite Prismatic Titan being in the game, Banner of War is still easily one of the best builds in the game and is arguably a better build than the Prismatic Consecration build. I've talked about this build multiple times on this channel already, so I'll keep this segment brief, but for this build you'll want the Strand subclass, obviously, Grapple Grenades, the Into the Fray aspect, the Banner of War aspect, Threat of Fury for bonus melee energy on Tangle Destruction, Threat of Warding for Woven Mail on Orb Pickup, and Threat of Generation for grenade energy from when you deal damage. For exotics to pair with this build, Syntheseps or Wormgod's Caress are must-haves for the bonus melee damage, and Tractor Cannon is very helpful to amplify your damage further. I've covered this build extensively in other videos, so if you'd like more details about Banner of War, I've left a link to my build guide for this build in the description below. But this build has been a household name in Destiny thanks to its absurd boss damage and great ad clear, so if you need a build for the day 1, look no further than this one. Alright, so with Titans out of the way, you're up next, Hunters, and what better way to start off by talking about easily the strongest build Hunters have access to, with that being the Combination Blow Prismatic Hunter build. If you thought I was going to recommend another build, I have one simple question to ask you. Why? The Combination Blow build for Prismatic Hunter has had this subclass in a vicious chokehold since it was released, and for good reason. This build is so far ahead of every other build Hunters have access to. Similarly to the Consecration build I covered earlier, I'll move quickly through this build, but the important things to have with this build are Gambler's Dodge for the refunded melee when dodging near enemies, Combination Blow, Stylish Executioner for an even stronger melee when exiting invisibility, Winter Shroud to slow targets so you can proc Stylish Executioner, Facet of Protection for the bonus damage resistance when surrounded, Facet of Purpose for an elemental buff on Orb Pickup, and your choice of Golden Gun for Restoration, Tether for Devour, or Silence and Squall for Frost Armor. For exotics, I'd recommend either Liar's Handshake for the melee damage boost, or an exotic class item that has Caliban's Hand in either Liar's Handshake or Syntheseps. This build is as dominant as it is mainly due to its ridiculous damage output and survivability, but it also has some solid ad clear which makes it perfect for a day 1 scenario. After the Combination Blow build, how can you even follow it up? Well, considering that Stasis is the new flavor for this episode, I'd like to recommend an old classic Stasis Hunter build. Next up, we have the Stasis Renewal Grass build. If you're unfamiliar, this build was widely popular back in the Witch Queen era thanks to the survivability and ability uptime this build offered. And with Stasis receiving some buffs, getting new seasonal artifact mods, and with Renewal Grass returning to its former glory, this build is back on the table. For this build, you'll need Duskfield Grenades, Grim Harvest for melee energy, and Touch of Winter for the Stasis Crystal it spawns. For fragments, Whisper of Rhyme is nice for an increased cap to frost armor stacks, Whisper of Shards for a boost to grenade regeneration on Stasis Crystal Destruction, and Whisper of Torment for more grenade energy when taking damage. For the exotic, you'll want to run Renewal Grasp as they will grant you frost armor when standing in your dust-filled grenades, which is crucial for this build. As I mentioned earlier, this episode's artifact also boosts stasis, so Crystalline Converter, Crystallized Autoloader, Armor of Aramis, and Brain Freeze will all help further push this build into being amazing. We finally made it to Warlocks, and to start us off, we have the Prismatic Getaway Artist build. Now, some of you might be confused with this pick considering that Getaway Artist was nerfed the last episode, but despite the nerf, this build is still phenomenal. For the setup, you'll want to run Threaded Needle for the 3 melee charges. Furthermore, you'll want to run Storm Grenade for its compatibility with Getaway Artist. For aspects, Lightning Surge is a great pick for ad clear, and Feed the Void is great to proc Devour when consuming your grenade, which will also grant you an Arc Soul thanks to Getaway Artist. For fragments, Faceted Protection is nice for the bonus damage resistance, and Faceted Purpose is nice as well for the elemental buff on orb pickup. For your super, I'd advise running either Song of Flame for restoration or Needle Storm for Woven Mail. For the exotic, if you haven't guessed it by now, Getaway Artist is required for this build. This is a build I've been using a lot lately, and I love it because it makes you feel like a one-man army thanks to its great ability uptime, great ad clear, and amazing survivability. For the final build in this video, we have the Stasis Bleak Watcher build. Now, I know most of you will probably mention that Prismatic Bleak Watcher would be better thanks to how strong Prismatic is, but I chose to highlight the Stasis version thanks to Stasis being the selected flavor this episode. Anywho, for this build, you'll want to run Cold Snap Grenades. For the aspects, I'd highly recommend Ice Flare Bolts for the Stasis trackers to freeze more enemies, but more importantly, Bleak Watchers as it's required for this build. For fragments, my recommendations will depend entirely on what exotic you choose to rock with this build, but my 2 suggestions are Whisper of Torment for grenade energy when taking damage, and Whisper of Shards to boost grenade regeneration when shattering stasis crystals. As I mentioned earlier as well, this build benefits from artifact mods this episode, so my recommended picks are Crystallized Autoloader and Brain Freeze. For the exotic, I'd recommend either Osmiomancy Gloves for 2 Cold Snap charges which will grant you 2 Bleak Watchers, or the new exotic chest piece, Rhyme Code Raymond, which creates stasis crystals around your Bleak Watchers and increases the range of your Bleak Watchers. I recommend this build because this build has top tier crowd control, which can be super helpful in the new dungeon, considering the fact that the enemies in this dungeon will be hitting harder intrinsically thanks to contest. But even outside of contest mode, I assume that this build will work wonders in the new dungeon. Well, that'll wrap it up for today's video. If you found it helpful, a like rating would be greatly appreciated, and consider subscribing to the channel for more Destiny 2 content dropping soon. If you'd like to come catch me live, then you can do so over at twitch.tv/SniperKH_, where I'll be live streaming the Day 1 dungeon race. Otherwise, follow my social media platforms linked below for updates on future content. With that being said, I'm SniperKH, and I'm out. Good luck with gaming.